LoreWarrior Armour. Svantovit Infantry Fighting Vehicle. Overview. In frontline units, the handholds on Omni-mechs provide battle-armoured troops with a means of rapidly moving across a battlefield. Second-line mechs lack the handholds, and elementals assigned to these units, or to vehicle-only garrison units, are forced to move under their own power, or to seek alternative transport. The Svantovit was developed to transport and support a point of troops. Capabilities. Formerly a conventional infantry transport, the Svantovit's original weaponry was downgraded to increase the size of the infantry compartment. This redesign still left the Svantovit with a formidable array of firepower. Twin long-range missile racks fixed to fire into the vehicle's forward arc comprise its primary weapons. They're used primarily for fire support once the troops have disembarked and the vehicle can withdraw from the immediate conflict and bring the launchers to bear. Turret-mounted Streak SRMs provide a defense against close assaults during the deployment of its troops. The SRM launchers can't fire on targets close to the sides of the vehicle, but side-mounted machine guns discourage enemy troops from approaching this dead zone. The massive exit hatch dominates the rear facing of the vehicle, prohibiting any weapons from being mounted there. A number of elemental points have experimented with on-the-move deployment from the Svantovit with no real success. Not only do the disembarking troops risk being injured, but the sudden weight reduction causes major handling issues for the vehicle's pilots. To reduce the number of crashes, standard operating procedure calls for the Svantovit to come to a full stop before opening the rear hatch. As might be expected, many vehicle crews quickly learned to crash decelerate from near flank speed to stationary in a few seconds. Though rough on the crew and the passengers, this maneuver does minimise the vehicle's vulnerability to enemy fire. Deployment. Svantovits are manufactured and used by every clan. Because they generally use the largest number of vehicles and infantry, clans Blood Spirit and Hell's Horses field the largest number of these, while Star Adder and Jade Falcon deploy the fewest. Jade Falcon uses the design solely for training purposes. Variants. A few clans continue to use the original configuration of the Svantovit. The cargo capacity of this variant is only 3 tons, barely sufficient for a platoon of foot infantry in cramped conditions, but the turret-mounted missile launchers do carry the Streak 4 system. Alright, so this is another 35-ton vehicle. This one's a hover one, as it mentioned. Its power plant is a Fusion 175, and its cruise speed is 108 kph, and its flank is 162 kph. Its armour is Compound Alpha Ferrofibrous. Its armament then is 2 Series 9 machine guns, 2 Type 5 Longbow LRM-5 launchers, and 2 Pattern J2 Streak SRM-2 launchers. Manufactured again by various clans. Its communication system is the Consolidated Type 21, and its targeting and tracking system is the Series 2 GPS. Stat-wise, this translates to a cruise of 10 and a flank of 15, very fast, but to be expected obviously of hover vehicles, with 10 heatsinks keeping everything nice and cozy. Its armour is 14 on the front, 11 on the sides, 10 on the rear, and 12 on the turret. The machine guns are located left and right, as you can see in the artwork, with 100 rounds of fire, 50 split between both. The 2 LRM-5 launchers are front-mounted, which look rather large, with a single ton of ammo split between both of them, and the 2 Streak launchers are mounted on the turret, with a single ton of ammo again, 25 shots for each launcher, located within the body, and then 5 tons for the cargo. Obviously this thing is a bit bigger than what the artwork would give. Yeah, I don't dislike the artwork, but you know what I think would have been a nice touch in the image was actually showing you an elemental near it, just for scale, to give you an idea. Because elementals are quite big, obviously. They're not absolutely massive, but, you know, we're talking about something that's average like the size of a Space Marine, which is fairly large, so having one of them next to this would have given you a good idea of just how big, and, you know, bringing in a whole point of elementals. Gives you an idea how big this hover vehicle is. It's not a bad design though. I don't dislike it. I think Matt Plog here has had a very clear idea visually about how he wanted to present all of the clan vehicles, and they've all kept that kind of, I think nowadays they call it a style guide, when you've got concept artists in like computer games and stuff, so this is definitely like that kind of idea, and so it's not deviating too much from this prescribed clan style. I like the fact as well that some of the write-up in this one is obviously bringing in some of the outlooks of the other clans. For instance, you know, with Blood Spirit and Hell's Horses being noted in the past in other source books as being more in favour of using combined arms tactics, whereas other clans like Star Adder and Jade Falcon are very much against it, favouring obviously using Omnimex and Battlemechs in their main forces with elementals, and then, you know, armour is very much tertiary to their goals for warfare. And Jade Falcon, to the point where they just outright refuse to use a vehicle like this in combat. But that makes sense for Jade Falcon. Most of the time they're going to be bringing their elementals in on their Omnimex because they primarily use those over using vehicles. But it's nice, it's a nice touch. I forgot to mention it with the Indra as well. I like the fact that the Indra was kind of retconned into the history with Turtle Bay. It's just a nice way of placing these vehicles in the invasion era of Battletech, because one of the biggest failings I always felt later on was, obviously, when the clans were introduced, and yeah, it's Battletech. The main thing about Battletech is mechs. Obviously, it's the biggest selling point. It's the unique IP of the whole thing. But obviously, the Innisphere had armoured vehicles since day dot. There's TRO 3026. It's existed pretty much. If it wasn't released at the exact same time, it was very, very close to TRO 3025. And vehicles were already in 3025, a few of the basic ones. So combined arms had always been a feature, and the idea that a more advanced, technologically, and at least faction would turn up, and they don't use any kind of vehicles, or at least nothing that was ever really shown in Technical Readout 3050. It takes a long time for clan armoured vehicles to really get their time in the sun. They get left out for such a long period, and this is also accounted for the fact that we know for a long time that Hell's Horses, when they turned up, they brought a lot of armoured forces with them. They were using all of these things. And obviously the provisional garrison clusters that would, you know, be left behind as the invasion force would move on, and obviously their task is to keep keep the peace on these planets. They're not stomping around in Battlemechs doing all this work. They have to be using vehicles like the Svantovit and the Odin and Indras and stuff like that. All these vehicles would have had to have been moving around on these planets, just in general, just to keep the populace under control, to deal with guerrilla forces, or hold out infantry and armoured vehicles that may still be roaming around on these worlds. So yeah, it was always a bit of a weird one for me that it took so long for them to really dedicate a big chunk of a technical readout to clan vehicles. Obviously, from a business perspective, obviously you're selling miniatures for your wargame, and one of the things that again sells a lot of miniatures, that shifts a lot of product, is going to be the mechs. It's less about tanks, especially for the clans. So I understand why it was probably so long, why we had to get to TRO 3060 before we had any significant clan vehicle numbers. But I'm glad that they did eventually get around to it, and that a majority of them look quite good. At least if they don't look good, they look distinct. You're not going to confuse any of these clan vehicles for an Innisphere one, for instance. They are so visually set apart, it's difficult to make that mistake. So I appreciate that. I quite like that, and it would be interesting to ever see if, with the more modern stuff, the writers, if they ever decide to come back to doing things like campaign sourcebooks that might bring in these clan vehicles and actually give them some use in those scenarios. But we'll have to see, I guess. But I have, as always, rambled on far, far too long. I shall leave you now. Try not to get in trouble. Bye-bye.